your Bibles to Genesis 37. We're going to talk about Joseph today. The Bible deals with real issues, you know that? Especially you get in the Old Testament, it deals with, matter of fact, I remember the last time I read all the way through, sometimes you read the Old Testament, man, I can't read much more of this because it's so violent and bloody sometimes. But we're going to talk about some issues today that if you, we don't have any kids here, so that's good, so I think we'll all be okay. But there are some adult issues that go on here we'll talk about. But last time we met, we talked about Joseph and how he was his father's favorite son. He had this beautiful coat that his father got for him, and he didn't work in the fields like the other brothers did, apparently. And he always tattled on his brothers when they did something they shouldn't do. And he would tell them about dreams he had that God had told him they were going to be subservient to him at some time, and they hated him. They literally hated him. Well, I talked about last week how, God does speak to us sometimes, but it's not always for us to go share with people. There are times maybe we shouldn't share what God tells us, but it just all depends on what God's saying. Joseph's dreams showed, like I said, that he would eventually be above his brother's position. And of course, they didn't want to hear that. But we see how God used what happened to him to save the whole lineage of Abraham. So it really turns out to be a good thing. Now, did God cause all that? No. But God turned it to the good. The Bible tells us that God will turn all those bad things to the good for us. And we just need to trust that. But let's start in Genesis 37 and verse 12. And it says, soon after this, Joseph's brothers went to pasture their father's flocks at Shechem. When they had been gone for some time, Jacob said to Joseph, your brothers are pasturing the sheep at Shechem. Get ready and I will send you to them. Well, you would think he was going to send them down there to help them work. Well, he would just send them for a report. We'll see here in a minute. He said, I'm ready to go, Joseph replied. Go and see how your brothers and the flocks are getting along, Jacob said. Then come back and bring me a report. So Jacob sent him on his way, and Joseph traveled to Shechem from their home in the valley of Hebron. When he arrived there, a man from the area noticed him wandering around the countryside. What are you looking for? He asked. I'm looking for my brothers, Joseph replied. Do you know where they are pasturing their sheep? Yes, the man told him. They have moved on from here, but I heard them say, let's go on to Dothan. So Joseph followed his brothers to Dothan and found them there. And you didn't know that it talks about Alabama in the Bible, did you? And when Joseph's brothers saw him coming, they recognized him in the distance, probably from the coat he was wearing, a coat of many colors. And it says, as he approached, they made plans to kill him. Well, it says, here comes the dreamer, they mockingly said. Come on, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns. We can tell our father a wild animal has eaten him, then we'll see what becomes of his dreams. Well, like I said, apparently Joseph didn't have to work in the fields like his brothers did. We don't know if it's because he was younger, or maybe just because his father showed favoritism toward him. But we talk about favoritism. It's never good to favor one child over another. Nothing good ever comes from that. And we got to really be careful of that kind of thing.
We don't know which brother had that idea to kill him and throw him.
It was kind of a mutual
Save
thing.
his brother.
It was kind of a mutual thing, yeah. I think they were all...
I think maybe his father, dads know a lot of things. And we get insight from God. He tells us things about our children. And we don't necessarily share it. So maybe God shared with him that he's going to be a favorite.
Could be. I had two brothers, and my oldest brother died when he was 21. I was 18, and my mom and him always had a real special. My mother and I didn't get along at all, and I mean it was like because I think we're so much alike.
So you're not her favorite?
Not at all. And I see why growing up. But my brother, he would she did a lot of sewing and stuff. She just loved to sew. Like I don't have any wedding dresses she made for girls and all this kind of stuff, but he would go in and sit down with her and talk to her. She had a nice rocking chair. I have it now upstairs in her house, but he would sit in that rocking chair with, the old 501 Levi's or whatever had the brass rivets. It left marks in that chair. Well, my mom always every time she'd see that, she'd think about him. And I said something to her one time about, and my brother and I think both and I said something to her about her favoring him, this older brother. And she said maybe it was because he was going to die young, and who knows. But like I said, I think the reason we didn't get along is because I was too much like her, and we just kind of felt it. Yeah, he was the firstborn. And then my little brother, he got by with everything because he was the youngest one, He was rotten, let me tell you. He got by with everything. And I didn't know about anything. Matter of fact, I had my mother. She was a school teacher. I took 2 years of Spanish in high school. She was the teacher. And she was always hammering me just to make a point, I think, So anyway, yeah, we get along well now, but it was rough back then. So anyway, notice how they called Joseph the dreamer. In other words, they were mocking him. Here comes comes the dreamer. You know, so they were mocking their brother. Like I said, their first thought was, let's kill him. Let's just get rid of him. We're sick of him. And we'll see what happens later. But going to Genesis verse 21, it says, but when Reuben heard of their scheme, he came to Joseph's rescue. Let's not kill him, he said. Why should we shed any blood? Let's just throw him in this empty cistern here in the wilderness. Then he'll die without our laying a hand on him. Reuben was secretly planning to rescue Joseph and return him to his father. Why do you think Reuben was thinking about that? Thinking about rescuing Joseph? Anybody have any ideas?
Get in favor with his father again?
Favor with his father's good. Well, if you'll remember, last time we talked about this, Reuben had slept with Bilhah, who was Rachel's servant right after Rachel had died. So it was his dad's concubine, which is like a lesser wife, but he had a sexual relationship with her, and nothing was ever done about it. But I think he probably was trying to get back in his father's graces because of what he'd done. And so that's why he had planned on going in, and that's why he said, hey, let's don't kill him, let's just put him in a cistern. Does everybody know what a cistern is? You know, it can be a natural pit. Most of the time it's dug. And in the plains, in the west, they used to dig a cistern right by their house and catch all the runoff off the roofs. Because a lot of times the well water wasn't good or they couldn't dig a well. My aunt and uncle actually in Oklahoma have a cistern behind their house. I mean, that house has been there 75 years probably. And the big house they call it's been there well over 100. But anyway, they had this cistern and they had I don't know what you call it. It's kind of like looks like a gas pump that sat over it, and you had a crank, and you crank it, and it had all these little cups on a chain, and it would pull the water up, and that was all inside of this contraption, and then the water would come out of a spout, and that was their drinking water. They'd use, and I think their well water was real salty, and they had gypsum and stuff in it, so it wasn't good to drink, but that was their drinking water. And my mother actually, I don't know, about a year or two ago, I was down at her house. Well, I guess they dismantled that thing, and my aunt gave all the relatives 1 or 2 cups from it. It's kind of cool. So back then, I didn't really realize what it was. You know, I didn't understand that's how they
You
got
had
the
one of
water.
those cups?
No, I don't have one.
He wasn't a favorite son.
No, actually, I love her. She's a sweetheart. Anyway, but they frequently back then, they would use these cisterns to hold prisoners. And you'll read later in the Bible where Jeremiah was thrown into one, but it was still halfway full of mud and muck, and he went up to his waist in mud, and that's where they held him. There's no way to climb out without somebody helping you. So that's what the brothers did. They threw him in that cistern, and they took off. Well, Reuben came back, and before he got back, he wasn't there apparently when it happened, but when he came back, we'll see that Joseph was gone. So let's go and read from verse 23. It says, so when Joseph arrived, his brothers ripped off the beautiful robe he was wearing. Then they grabbed him and threw him into the cistern. And you know, it's no telling how far down he went. I mean, it could have been pretty hard, and landing hard down there. Then Then just as they were sitting down to eat, they looked up and saw a caravan of camels in the distance coming toward them. It was a group of Ishmaelite traders taking a load of gum, balm, and aromatic resin from Gilead down to Egypt. Judah said to his brothers, what will we gain by killing our brother? We'd have to cover up the crime. Instead of hurting him, let's sell him to those Ishmaelite traders. Well, who are the Ishmaelites? We realized who was the founder of Ishmaelites? There was Hagar, right? Abraham's wife Hagar, and then Ishmael was born, not the son of promise. Well, these are descendants of that. And also the Midianites were from Keturah, who was after Sarah died, Abraham remarried Keturah, and that's where the Midianites come from. So this was a group of them coming. This is a well-known trade route, and they came through and they sold him for some silver. Let's see. After all, this is finished in verse 27. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood. And his brothers agreed. Verse 28 says, so when the Ishmaelites, who were Midianite traders, came by, Joseph's brothers pulled him out of the cistern and sold him to them for 20 pieces of silver, and the traders took him to Egypt. Now, when the Bible says 20 pieces of silver, that's, the King James says that, 20 pieces of silver. You'll notice in the King James, the word pieces is in italics. Anytime you see a word in italics in the King James Bible, it means it wasn't really there. They have added that word to make the meaning more clear. A lot of your translations of the Bible are just really translations of the King James version of the Bible. Like the New Living Translation, they didn't go back and take all the manuscripts they have and copies of manuscripts and all that and redo the Bible. They just take like the King James and make it even easier to understand. And that's one of the reasons I prefer to study the King James, because it's so close to what the original was. But realize anytime you read it and you see a word in italics, that word was not there. in Hebrew or Greek. They've added that word. Well, they do that to make it easier. But if you look at this, Joseph was sold for 20 pieces of silver. They don't know what, it may have been 20 shekels. At the time, a shekel, well, in our time, a shekel is worth about $2.50. So you're talking about $50 worth of, that's all he sold for, $50. And I think Judas was sold for $25 more than this, or like $75 worth. It's just nothing. And here they sold him off for that. Well, slavery was in high demand in Egypt. You'll see later on, the descendants of Joseph and all that end up, Moses comes along, and the Israelites are the slaves of the Egyptians. So they were in a lot of demand. And like I said, this route is where they carried all their embalming supplies. The Egyptians were huge on embalming. Nobody else had ever done that, and they started that. And of course, we do that today. You can get by without embalming in this country, but you got to bury them within 24 hours. And that's the way most countries are. If you don't embalm somebody within 24 hours, you got to bury them. And it just stops disease and cholera and things like that. So anyway, he was sold for 20-something of silver. We don't really know what. Verse 29 says, sometime later, Reuben returned to get Joseph out of the cistern. When he discovered that Joseph was missing, he tore his clothes in grief. Then he went back to his brothers and lamented, the boy is gone. What will I do now? Who was he thinking about? He was just thinking about himself, wasn't he? What will I do now? Well, apparently they didn't have a whole lot of remorse because they sat down and have you ever done something that you knew was dirty and rotten and you shouldn't have done it? And you feel guilty? You don't feel like eating, And you sure can't sleep, So these guys apparently didn't have any kind of remorse whatsoever. They'd sit down to eat and all of a sudden, and then Reuben's like, what's going to happen to me? Not worried about his brothers either, So anyway, you kind of want to get the idea that he wasn't guilty of that because he wasn't there. But if that would have happened in this country, he'd been found guilty of guilt by association, right? Just being a part of it, he'd have been found guilty. How many heard about that security guard that arrested murdering that girl the other day downtown Orlando? How horrible is that? Somebody's supposed to be there to protect you and help you, and it's just
They've
awful.
only been there like 4 or 5 months.
Oh, is that right? I didn't know that. I didn't hear the whole story.
I read it.
It's just awful. All right, let's go to verse 31. It says, then the brothers killed a young goat and dipped Joseph's robe in its blood. They sent the beautiful robe to their father with this message. Look at what we found. Doesn't this robe belong to your son? They didn't say to our brother. They said, doesn't this robe belong to your
They
son?
called it the boy.
Yep.
Reuben did.
And what they're trying to do is, I think, is trying to back themselves away from the guilt. They're trying to say, not our brother, but this is your son. So it goes on to say, their father recognized it immediately. Yes, he said, it is my son's robe. A wild animal must have eaten him. So he didn't even have to tell me. That's the first thing he thought. A wild animal must have eaten him. Joseph has clearly been torn to pieces. Then Jacob tore his clothes and dressed himself in burlap, or actually the Bible says sackcloth. He mourned deeply for his son for a long time. His family all tried to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. I will go to my grave mourning for my son, he would say, and then he would weep. There's nothing harder on a human being than losing a child. I mean, even losing a spouse or a brother or sister, there's nothing like losing a child. And I saw what my mom and dad went through, and 8 years after that, they divorced because instead of pulling together, they went apart, and that happens a lot. And it's really a sad deal, but that's one of the hardest things human beings can go through is losing a child. And I don't wish that on anybody. Verse 36 says, meanwhile, the Midianite traders arrived in Egypt, where they sold Joseph to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. Potiphar was the captain of the palace guard, and we'll hear more about Potiphar later and his wife. Let's talk about rending clothes or ripping your clothes. Have you seen in the Old Testament how when bad things happen, they rip their clothes or they put on sackcloth and they put ashes all over them and do that to mourn? Well, as I got studying this, I didn't realize, they always had a ceremony for everything. They always did everything right down how it was prescribed. Well, even with rending your clothes, they did the same thing. Let me read this to you. It says, ripping clothes is a chief sign of mourning in the East. It says, it is customary to lay aside jewels and fine clothing and to be clothed in sackcloth while making loud wailing and screaming and moaning and all that. The ceremony of rending clothes requires a knife. Cuts are first made on the right side of the upper garment for a brother, sister, son, daughter, or wife, and then on the left side for a father or a mother. So to even mourn, you got to do it the prescribed way. Isn't that crazy? The people out here are so legalistic about everything. Well, other garments are cut likewise. Sackcloth we think of burlap, and that was part of it, but also sackcloth is generally made of hair of goats or camels, and is very coarse and black. Sackcloth can be worn either over or under the outer garments, or instead of them. And that's what we see most times. They take off everything else and just put this sackcloth on, and then they put the ashes all over them. And that's how they were born. And I didn't realize that they would cut certain places for certain people in their family. I thought that was kind of interesting.
The sackcloth was to keep you from falling asleep now.
You think?
It was, because
it's so
that's,
itchy.
yeah, it's so itchy, it's supposed to make you uncomfortable,
Okay.
so that you don't fall asleep, because they're starting to sit Shiva now for 6 days, and somebody has to stay awake.
Wow. Interesting.
Yeah,
That is interesting.
yeah, well, it's kind of weird too.
Yeah, I think it's
Remember, they had no
Things
TV.
coming.
Yeah.
Too much free time.
No distractions.
Yep, that's right.
Like having prescribed tears for a certain person, and all those things, when they started, had a purpose. You know, they might
sure
have
they
become
did.
legalistic after a while, but
Right.
there was a reason for mourning that way.
Right. Well, it's like when the law came
And
along.
there was a need for it at one time.
Right. But
And
it
helped
gets out of
people.
hand.
But
Right.
it gets out of hand,
Right.
like any other condition.
It's just like the ritual they went through to wash their hands,
That becomes
Yeah.
a ritual.
you know?
And
But-
then rich people started hiring people to mourn, and the louder they were, the more money you had, and I'm gonna have a small group of people.
We humans can really mess things up, can't
Yes.
we? And of course, the devil's encouraging that too, so.
There were mourners for a living.
Born for a living.
There were people who were professional mourners.
Isn't that crazy? Well, isn't it interesting how the brothers deceived their father with the blood of the goat?
And they never told him all those years. They
Nope.
never told him.
Never told him. He'd have probably killed them if he'd have found out.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
Never know. But think about
one
how,
of them would have broken down his.
Yeah, they did someone.
How do we know we never told him?
you know, that's like when somebody
Because
murders
he didn't know,
somebody.
later on, they found him, he didn't know.
That's like when somebody murders somebody, they
You're
always end up
saying
killing
it
somebody.
because it's not in the Bible?
Oh, yes, it is, because
Found out.
when they get there, he says to who he thinks it's Joseph anyway, he says, my dad's already so unhappy because he won't let him keep Benjamin. He said, my dad's already so unhappy because his one son is dead.
Talking about when they get to Egypt.
Yeah, when she
Years
said
later.
they never,
Years
yeah, so you
later.
know that the
Years
father
later.
never knows except that Joseph is dead.
Until he actually sees him, he doesn't
Except
believe it.
Joseph.
Yeah.
Then what do? You have to fess up, right?
Well, you don't know what he did, you don't know what he said to him.
Yeah. Of course, they could have lied then and say, well, we just found his coat, we thought he was dead too.
Yeah.
But of course, Joseph knew. And, but what's interesting is they used the blood of a kid, or a little goat. Well, what did Jacob use to deceive his father Isaac? He used skin from a goat, didn't he? Or a sheep. He put it on his arms, his mom helped him, and they deceived his dad. So they deceived Jacob, and then Jacob had deceived his father. Isn't that crazy? So this deception goes on. Now, how many of you believe God's people were perfect? After hearing all this, by far, huh? I mean, not at all. So anyway, as we go on to Genesis 38, we see one of the sons named Judah. He marries a Canaanite woman, and that was wrong to do because they were only supposed to marry along family lines. They were supposed to keep the godly line perfect and not marry outside of the race. Well, but look at other people in the family did the same thing. They'd marry Canaanites, whatever. But so Judah married a Canaanite and ended up having 3 sons. He had Er, E-R, that's spelled, Onan, and Shelah. And it says when Judah was 31 years old and Er was 15, Judah set up a marriage, arranged a marriage for Er to a girl named Tamar. And it says, and she was a Canaanite. The Bible tells us that Er was very evil and God killed him. How many times do you ever hear about God killing somebody? Thank God we live under grace, huh? But he actually killed him because he was so evil. And he doesn't tell us, the Bible doesn't tell us any more about that. All we know is that he was so wicked and evil that God killed him. So what happened is because of that, Judah told Onan to go in with Tamar and have a child with her to carry on his brother's lineage, to bless his brother. Well, we're going to see what happened there, and this is where I said kind of gets into an adult situation. We're going to talk about it. In chapter 38, verse 9, it says, but Onan was not willing to have a child who would not be his own heir. So whenever he had intercourse with his brother's wife, he spilled the semen on the ground. This prevented her from having a child who would belong to his brother. But the Lord considered it evil for Onan to deny a child to his dead brother. So the Lord took Onan's life too. God killed him. It's serious business, isn't it?
He
You know,
wasn't a very good daddy.
yeah, he's not a great example. We'll find out later too about that. You know, I've heard a lot of people say that by spilling the seed on the ground, that's why God killed him. That is not why God killed him. God killed him because he didn't honor his brother and carry on the lineage for him. So his line would continue. It could be that the godly line for Jesus was supposed to come through Aaron and not Onan. So that may, but let me read you some notes that I found.
Did the guy, Onan, whatever, did he know that when he wasted his semen? Did he know he was doing wrong?
Yeah,
Did he do it
absolutely.
because he thought he was-
Because his dad just told him to go do
Jewish
that.
law says, one of the 613 laws are that if your brother dies, you have to sleep with your sister-in-law, so if he doesn't have any children.
He must not have feared the Lord too much because he knew the Lord took his brother.
Yeah.
Not at all.
And see, this is pre-law, but it did carry over to the law, and they say that's part of the law.
Yeah, so that was that's their tradition. You know, I mean, you see that when, who is it? The one that's in Christ's line? Ruth? That's how she gets married.
Oh, yeah.
Well, and look at Rahab, you know, a harlot, prostitute, and she's in the godly line, which is amazing, I think. Well, let me read you some of Dake's notes on this. He said, Judah's firstborn, seems to have been the chosen one in Judah's family through whom the Messiah was to come. Even after his death, Tamar, his widow, bore a son to Judah, the dad. And we're going to read about that in a minute, whose name Pharez, either with a Z or an S, P-H-A-R-E-Z or P-H-A-R-E-S, it's spelled different ways in the Bible, appears with hers, with Tamar's, in the line of Christ in Matthew 1:3. Er's wickedness may have included despising his privilege to bring forth one in the lineage of Christ. And we just don't know why he was considered so evil. And David goes on to say, Onan resented a child of his being born to carry on Er's name. He didn't want to give his brother a child. And both were wicked men and may have been bitter enemies. We just don't know. Hence, Onan wanted his brother's name blotted out, and his name would be blotted out without a son to carry it on. The firstborn, in such case, carries on the dead man's name. Furthermore, the devil may have stirred up hatred in Onan for the seed of the woman, who seems to have been intended to come through Er's offspring. So, we don't know why, but for some reason Onan did not want his brother to have a child, to carry on his name. Anyway, so the Bible goes on to tell us that Judah was afraid that God was going to kill Tamar just like he had killed Er and Onan. So he told her, he says, why don't you just pack up, go live with your mom and dad for a few years, and then when my youngest son, Shelah, is old enough, then I'll arrange the marriage, you guys can get married, and he can give you a child for these other brothers and all that, and go on. Well, let's go to chapter 38, verse 12. And remember, these are God's chosen people here. It gives us a lot of hope, let me tell you.
There's a lot.
Yeah, Genesis 38, verse 12. What's that? Yeah, thank goodness. Verse 12 says, some years later, Judah's wife died. After the time of mourning was over, Judah and his friend Hira the Adullamite went to Timnah to supervise the shearing of his sheep. Someone told Tamar, look, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep. Tamar was aware that Shelah had grown up, but no arrangements had been made for her to come and marry him. The father just kind of put it off, didn't think about it. So she changed out of her widow's clothing. She was still wearing her widow's clothing from Er's death. This is like 4 or 5 years later. And it says she changed out of her widow's clothing and covered herself with a veil to disguise herself. Then she sat beside the road at the entrance to the village of Enaim, which is on the road to Timnah. Judah noticed her and thought she was a prostitute. So what does he do as a godly man? He says, you know what? I'll tell you about Jesus. No, he doesn't do that. He said he didn't recognize she was a prostitute since she had covered her face. So he stopped and propositioned her. This is God's chosen man of faith and power. Let me have sex with you, he said, not realizing that she was his own daughter-in-law. How much will you pay to have sex with me, Tamar asked. She's right along with him. I'll send you a young goat from my flock, Judah promised, but what will you give me to guarantee that you will send the goat, she asked. What kind of guarantee do they want here? So they're bargaining, they're going over this deal, you know. And let's see where I'm at. Yeah, I'm just trying to find my place there. Okay, she's answered, leave me your identification seal, and it's where they wore a chain around their, some kind of rope around their neck with an identification. She said, leave me that and the cord, and leave me your staff. Well, your walking stick. So Judah gave them to her, then he had intercourse with her, and she became pregnant. Afterwards, she went back home, took off her veil, and put on her widow's clothing as usual. Later, Judah asked his friend Hira the Adullamite to take the young goat to the woman and to pick up the things he had given her as his guarantee. But Hira could not find her. So he asked the men who lived there, "Where can I find the shrine prostitute who was sitting beside the road at the entrance to Enaim?" "We've never had a shrine prostitute here," they replied. So Hira returned to Judah and told him, "I couldn't find her anywhere, and the men of the village claimed they've never had a shrine prostitute there." There were false religions that they had prostitutes that to worship these false gods, a man would actually go in and have sex with this prostitute to worship this false god. And that's what the temple prostitute was. It's something. Verse 23 says, "Then let her keep the things I gave her," Judah said. "I sent the young goat as we agreed, but you couldn't find her. We'd be the laughing stock of the village if we went back again to look for her." About 3 months later, Judah was told, "Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has acted like a prostitute. And now, because of this, she's pregnant." And look what Judah's response is. He says, "Bring her out and let her be burned," Judah demanded. Do you remember the story that they caught this man and woman in adultery, and they brought the woman to Jesus and they threw her at his feet? They wanted him to judge her. Isn't that amazing? They only brought the woman.
Yeah.
It takes two to tango, doesn't it? And it's really sad. And Jesus, what did he do? Remember, he just kind of wrote in the dirt, and they're all waiting to see what he was going to, how he's going to convict her. And he said, "Let whoever has never sinned cast the first stone." And everybody left. Well, this is kind of the same thing. You know, they're judging her, and it's okay that he had sex with a prostitute, but because she's a prostitute, they're going to burn her to death.
It's cultural, you know,
Yeah. Well, we're going to talk about the Code of Hammurabi. That is the law that went by them, just in a minute. But, you know, we got to realize that, I mean, sin's sin. If we can cast a stone, we can't do it because we've all sinned ourselves, you know. There's things we got to be careful of. Verse 25 says, "But as they were taking her out to kill her, she sent this message to her father-in-law. 'The man who owns these things,'" she had them in her hand apparently, "'made me pregnant. Look closely. Whose steel and cord and walking stick are these?' Judah recognized them immediately and said, 'She is more righteous than I am, because I did not arrange for her to marry my son Shelah.'" He still wasn't worried about him sleeping with her. He just more worried about he didn't arrange for his son. I don't understand these guys sometimes. And it says, "And Judah never slept with Tamar again," which is good. And he got caught once. I guess he's not going to do it again. And then, like we are as human beings, sometimes we're not remorseful until we get caught. We're more sorry that we got caught than we are that we did the sin that we committed to begin with. That's human nature, isn't it? So, verse 27. When the time came for Tamar to give birth, it was discovered that she was carrying twins. There are 3 twins, sets of twins mentioned in the Bible. We know who the first were, right? Jacob and Esau. The next 2 were these. And the last 2 was Thomas Didymus, one of the apostles, and he had a sister that was a twin. So those are only three twins we see in the Bible, those 3. That's kind of interesting. It says, when the time came for Tamar to give birth, it was discovered she was carrying twins. While she was in labor, one of the babies reached out his hand. The midwife grabbed it and tied a scarlet string around the child's wrist, announcing, "This one came out first." But then he pulled back his hand, and out came his brother. What? It must have been. Yeah. Man. When they're going out in the end, oh.
Do you realize how important the order of birth is to them?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
Everything depends on
she's
that.
identifying this little thing who isn't out yet.
And that's why she did that.
And
Because
it's all slimy and.
that first child, the first son, gets everything.
Everything, yeah, the next one gets nothing.
Very interesting. She says, "What?" the midwife exclaimed. "How do you break out first?" She was looking at the little baby, the second born. So he was named Perez, or it could be in the New Testament, it's spelled P-H-E-R-E-Z or E-S. Then the baby with the scarlet string on his wrist was born, and he was named Zerah. Most people back in this time, like I said a while ago, they followed what they called the Code of Hammurabi, and that was the law in the Middle East. Most countries then followed that. This is before the law was given from God to Moses. And if you remember, the children of God, the Israelites, went to Moses, and when they're in the wilderness, they said, "Man, we need a law. We need laws to follow." And Moses says, "Why? You don't need any laws. You've got the Lord, you know." And they said, "Yeah." But they said, "But everybody else has laws." Well, these are the laws, and I'm going to read some of them to you in a minute. But anyway, so Moses went and talked to God. He sat on the mercy seat, and he said, "Lord, the people want laws." And God says, "Okay, I'll give them to them, but if they're going to follow one, they've got to follow them all." And we know that the reason God gave those is to show us that we cannot live that life without Christ. We just can't do it. And when we look at those laws, I mean, you look at it, it's totally, you're unable to do it. I mean, first of all, we can't go take animals to a big synagogue and sacrifice them, can we? So that law knocks a lot of the stuff out we can't do. And then all the other laws, there's just no way we could ever do them. So the Code of Hammurabi contained 282 laws written by scribes on 12 tablets. Unlike earlier laws, it was written in Akkadian, which was the daily language in Babylon. Everybody know where Babylon was? In Iraq, and spilled a little bit into Iran. And could therefore be read by any literate person in the city. So anybody, a lot of people weren't literate back then, but the ones that were could go read it. So here are some of the death penalty laws. And like I say, I'm not going to read all 282, but these are the ones that deal with the death penalty. One who stole from a palace was to be put to death. Such property was held more sacred than life itself. So if you stole from a palace, you're going to be put to death. Number two, the purchaser of stolen property was to be put to death as a thief. So if somebody brought you some stolen property and you bought it, they put you to death too. And we have laws against that today, taking stolen stuff and buying it. Number three, a woman justly accused of adultery was required to throw herself into a river. Not a man, but a woman. She had to throw herself in there, and the purpose is to drown, not just to get back out. Now I'm sure they sit there and waited until she drowned. Number four, a woman who neglected her house and belittled her husband. Now women, listen. And Barbara, you better get this. Tell me I bought my little rock off eBay. You forgot about that, didn't you? Remember that little stuff I brought that was from the Helen Fire Room stuff? Anyway, long story. You guys haven't been here. Anyway, it says, a woman who neglected her house and belittled her husband was to be thrown into a river. Number five, thrown into a river.
The other one said she had to throw herself.
The prostitute,
Yes.
the prostitute had to jump.
Had to jump, but the other one.
One was thrown in, the other one jumped.
Yeah.
Either way, you're going to die.
Because they were over the prostitute got loose, but the wife, that was the end of
Maybe they didn't want to touch her.
it. Yeah.
I mean, really, I don't know.
That may be it.
Could be. Could be. They consider her unclean, probably. Number five, a builder of a faulty house which fell and killed the owner was to be put to death. So if you're an engineer, you better make sure your math is
Don't
right.
come after my husband.
Write that one down, write that one down.
That's good.
What do you do to a builder of a house? Put to death.
You do have a little lake behind your house.
You swim, Edward?
Edward's not laughing.
All right, number six, a poor thief who had nothing to pay back was to be put to death. So if you're going to be a thief, you better be sure you have a little extra money. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
Number seven, one who stole property from a burning house was to be thrown into the fire. So if you run in there and fire and get out, they just throw you right back in. Yeah, yeah. The man who cheated in selling goods to a neighbor was to be thrown into the water to drown. So you weren't supposed to cheat your neighbor. Number nine, the woman who brought about the death of her husband for the sake of another man was to die. Now, not the man killing his wife for another woman. Isn't that crazy? It's all against the woman.
It's really a man's world back then,
Boy,
too.
no kidding. Number 10, a man who killed a gentleman's daughter, this is crazy one too. A man who killed a gentleman's daughter would be put to death. But if he killed a poor man's daughter, he was only to pay a fine, which is about a pound of silver. Which is like, what, $500 maybe for a pound of silver. So if you kill somebody, make sure it's a poor man if you kill their daughter. Isn't that crazy? But that's the law that they lived by back then. Those were just the death penalty laws. Those were 10, so they had 272 other laws that were probably just as silly and crazy. Anyway, death penalties were carried out with burning, drowning, and the sword. Other penalties in this code included cutting out the tongue for lying or denying parents, plucking out eyes for hatred of foster parents, cutting off the breast of a nurse who had caused a child to die, cutting off fingers of those who smoked parents, cutting off the ears of slaves who struck the master's children, cutting off the fingers of a physician who used brass lancets to open abscesses if the patient died. Who would want to be a doctor? And I mean, they didn't have antibiotics and all that stuff, so who knows. And the scourging of a man was 60 stripes who struck a superior. Remember in Jesus' time, when somebody was scourged, they only scourged them 39 times because they said the 40th time would kill them. And that's why they'd only whip them. And even Jesus, we look at Isaiah, and in the New Testament, we don't really see what happened to Jesus in the New Testament. But if you go to Isaiah, as he has this vision of what happened to Christ, says he was beat so severely with that cat o' nine tails and those bone or metal fragments on the end that he didn't even look like a man. His skin was gone, it was just open flesh. And, I mean, when you read that, you know, the movie with Mel Gibson that came out, a lot of people really upset about that. But, you know, I think it really showed what Christ probably really looked like in the crucifixion. We get this candy-coated picture in most movies. You know, you see him up there with his long cloth on, he's maybe got a little bit of blood, you know. No, the Bible tells us, Isaiah, that he was so messed up, he didn't even look like a human being. So, I mean, we got to realize that Jesus paid a heavy, heavy, heavy price for us.
And that's physical.
That's physical, and that was all for our physical healing.
He was man, yeah, he felt our
Yep,
pain.
it was. But like I say, that the whipping, see, the shedding of the blood, that was for our spiritual stuff, our spiritual side, our sins. But the whipping was for our healing. And so you can't divide one and the other. You can't say, God, Jesus saved you for your sins, but he's not going to heal. You can't do that. He died for both, and you can't separate it. We're not taught that a lot in this country, unfortunately, but we'll talk about it more. In accordance with the code, women could be consecrated as the bride of an idol god and used in prostitution for devotees of the idol. Here's the temple prostitutes. Like the father could sell them to somebody at the temple and they'd make her a prostitute. Now, who would do that? Their daughter. But they did. So it was real unfortunate. In marriage, the father had the final say as to whom his daughter should marry. A man desiring a wife was free to make his own choice, but a woman was not. An unsatisfactory wife could be divorced by her husband by simply saying, I have divorced her. Well, the Jewish law that came later, all you had to say is 3 times, say, I divorce you. 3 times and you'd be divorced. Well, here in the Hammurabi Code, they just said, I divorced her 1 time and it was done. Well, it goes on to say that she would be given nothing when she departed from his house. Can you imagine back in those days? I mean, it'd be hard enough now, but back then, nothing.
You're bigger.
Oh, it would be terrible.
He changed his mind the next day.
Boy, you'd have a whipping, wouldn't he? Do that to your wife. That's just insane. Let's see. It goes on to say, let's see, on the other hand, if he said, I have not put her away, he could take another wife, and the first woman would remain in his house as a maid. So it would change the order of which, you know, who took over as a wife. If a wife wanted a divorce, she had to prove that her husband had injured her reputation, then she could go free. And I'm sure that was probably very hard to do. You know, it's like Catholic divorces. Nothing bad against Catholic Church, but for a man to go get a Catholic divorce is very easy. For a woman to do that, it's extremely hard to this day. And I heard somebody the other day talking about that. A woman just almost can't get a divorce in the Catholic Church, which is different than legal divorce, if you know what I'm talking about. The Catholics actually.
If they were married in the
The
Catholic.
biggest
Yeah.
thing that they can get a divorce from, which happened a lot in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, if their husband was gay.
Really?
Yeah, because I've known 2 or 3 women who, if that's the grounds that they
Interesting.
reject it. Yeah, because it's called their husband, and then they just have to, or the marriage has not been consecrated, it's been longer than 6 months. And that is almost, but other than that, you're right. Yeah, because half my family's Catholic and they're all divorced.
Speaking of homosexuality, I heard something the other day that the Mormon Church is changing their stance. I am shocked by that.
Yeah,
Because they've been morally right on that stuff. Even though I don't agree with their doctrine, they've been morally right on that, and they're changing their stance.
Oh, yeah, started with Boy Scouts. Because that was their biggest.
Yeah, they're
program.
huge Boy Scouts.
They went with the change.
Wow. I couldn't believe
We thought
it.
they're about 65% of Scouts.
Yeah.
And
And they all meet at their churches. Is what we meet at
That's
there.
your youth program.
Yeah, it
they're
is.
going to marry them in the church then.
Huh?
They're going to marry them in the church.
I don't know if they're going to do marriage. I can't remember exactly what it was, but they changed.
They're not going that far. They're going, saying that you can be homosexual, but you can't marry or have a relationship.
Okay.
So they're saying you can be cool, you can come out and say you're gay, but you can't practice gay. So
And you know,
it's,
if you look at homosexuality is all about sex. I don't know why I'm talking about sex. If you're in a really close relationship, look at David and Jonathan in the Bible. They were like the closest friends. They're closer than brothers. Well, the homosexual community a lot of times said, well, they were gay. Well, no, they weren't gay. But the thing is, unless there's a sexual union going on, it's not homosexuality. You know what I'm saying? Because that's what homosexuality is, the sexual part of it. So you can be great friends, and there's nothing wrong with that. But when you cross that line, that's where God says no.
Some of the other churches, Episcopalians don't allow that, but you can't be active.
Yeah, right. And, you know, I could live with that. I could see that, you know, you want people under the word in your church, but if they're, same with an adultery. If somebody's having adultery, you know, you've got to deal with that as a pastor in the church. You've got to go deal with those sins. So, it's just a hard thing. Okay, it says if a man was in debt, he could sell his wife or children. This is what I can't do. He could sell his wife or children or bind them to work in a house of a purchaser for 3 years and then go free. The relationship of sonship could be dissolved if there were grounds for such. Or you say, I don't want to be your dad anymore. Well, I don't want to be your son anymore. Well, they get dissolved. Isn't that crazy? The code of Hammurabi was civil, not ceremonial. It wasn't religious. There were no admonitions to worship, no directions concerning altars, offerings and sacrifices, and no doctrines taught. It was the civil law in Babylon, Assyria, and a bunch of Canaan and Egypt in the days of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It gives the Bible reader an insight into the laws of that period before the law of Moses. Next week we're going to talk about Joseph and how he lived in Potiphar's house, and most of you already know what happened there. We're going to talk about that. But we're going to see how God lifted him up and promoted him with Pharaoh. He ended up becoming Pharaoh's right-hand man. And God did that so that he could save his family.
What's amazing is he's like this spoiled little brat, and then he turns out to be this
Yep.
wonderful worker.
Yep.
So when you children won't, yeah, I mean, it's amazing because
Sometimes
No,
we do that.
that's right.